Attano was born in the city of Karnaka to a lower-class family. His father would pass away in an accident at work and his older sister would leave, leaving Corvo to be raised by his mother. At 16, Corvo would join the Sorkonen Guard and would quickly rise through the ranks, and at the age of 18 would be gifted to the Emperor of Dunwall, even being assigned as the royal protector to his daughter Jessamine, whom Corvo would become romantically involved with, and eventually the two would have a daughter, Emily, with Corvo's relation to the royal family being an open secret to the court. In the middle of a plague, Jessamine would send Corvo to a journey to seek help from the other kingdoms, but he would come back with no help. It was at this moment that a group of assassins named the Whalers, led by a legendary assassin named Dowd, would attack, and Dowd would personally kill Jessamine in front of Corvo and Emily before taking the girl and disappearing. Now left with a dying Jessamine, Corvo would be found and blamed for the assassination, and he would be held prisoner for 6 months, where his accusers themselves would reveal that they were behind everything, the day right before his execution. However, the next morning he'd be freed by a group calling themselves the Loyalists, and would be taken to their base of operations, the Hound Pits pub. That night, Corvo would be visited by an otherworldly being called the Outsider, who would grant Corvo supernatural abilities. Corvo would then be instructed by the Loyalists to take out a series of targets, all involved in Jessamine's assassination, some of whom Corvo would kill, and others he'd deal with using other methods. Eventually, having in some way eliminated all of his conspiracy members, during this time he would rescue Emily, bringing her to the pub where she'd be protected. After killing the man who had arranged for Jessamine's death, Corvo would then return to the Loyalists. However, that same night he'd be poisoned by the leaders, but the one to poison him would be his friend Samuel, who didn't give him the full dose, only making it look like he had died. Samuel would then be instructed to leave Corvo in the flooded district, where he thought the man would be safe. However, this turned out to be the lair of Dowd and his Whalers themselves, and after breaking out of his confinement and breaking his way to Dowd, the two would meet, with Dowd revealing that he had also been granted powers by the Outsider, and the two would fight, with Dowd even calling off his assassins, and the two would duel, with Corvo eventually getting the upper hand. With his blade at Dowd's throat, Corvo would listen to the man ask for his own life, and it was here that he would make the hardest decision of his life, and would spare Dowd, as he felt that Jessamine wouldn't want him to murder an unarmed man, even the one who had killed her. After this, Corvo would return to the pub, finding that several Loyalists had been killed by their leaders, but he would save the remaining members before calling Samuel and tracking the leaders down, only to discover that the two had been poisoned. And Corvo would attempt to take Emily and leave, but the final Loyalist leader would attack him, and Corvo would be forced to fight and kill him. Now, having saved his daughter yet again, Corvo would place Emily at her rightful place at the throne, where he would serve as her loyal protector for the rest of his life. Jonathan Emmett Reid was born in the city of London to Aubrey and Emmeline Lead, and later his sister Mary would be born. At some point in his youth, Aubrey would leave his family, and Jonathan would later go on to become a doctor. It would even serve in World War I, gaining wide fame in the field of medicine for his specialty in blood. Upon his return to London, Jonathan would be embraced and turned into a vampire by Mirrodin Wilt, later waking up in a mass grave. Now a vampire, feeling his newly awakened hunger, Jonathan would seek out blood, embracing and feeding on the first person he came across, who just so happened to be Mary, who had gone looking for him. Now, regaining his senses, Jonathan would try to save his sister, but she'd pass away in his arms. This would be witnessed by a group of vampire hunters who would chase Jonathan down, forcing him to hide in an abandoned house where he would attempt to take his own life but would fail, and now following a blood trail would eventually find a feral vampire named William Bishop and would save a priest, Sean Hampton. It's here where he would meet a fellow vampire, Elizabeth Ashbury, and fellow doctor Edgar Swansea, both of whom would help him understand his new life. Edgar would even allow him to stay and work in Pembroke Hospital, where Jonathan would help the sick and injured, as well as get more acquainted with Edgar and Elizabeth, as well as uncover more about the epidemic, discovering that vampires were its source. Jonathan would then discover that Mary had risen like him and had taken their mother and a priest to her grave. He would confront Mary, only to find that she was succumbing to her new nature, and she would almost kill their mother before Jonathan would manage to talk her down. But she would still fight Jonathan, hoping to end her madness by killing him, but would fail, lashing out, and in a moment of clarity, would beg her brother to end her suffering. And Jonathan, reluctantly, would do just that, burying her once again, swearing to find a cure. Later, he would meet his creator, calling Reid his champion and warning about the famished queen. However, Jonathan wouldn't heed this warning, and that same night would meet with Elizabeth, who would again give her condolences about Mary, as well as an invitation to join a society of vampires called the Ascalon Club, who feared a second great hunt of vampires by the hunters. He would join this club and would be sent to investigate a set of scowls, eliminating the source of one branch of the epidemic, and would encounter the vampire hunter McCullum. After completing this task, he would be ordered to turn a man into a vampire so that they would finance the Ascalon Club, but Jonathan would refuse, killing the man instead, and as a result, would be thrown out of said club. Returning to Pembroke, Jonathan would find that Edgar had been attacked, and McCullum would again confront him, and the two would fight, with Jonathan winning but sparing him, hoping that showing mercy to McCullum would show him that they had the same goal. Now, going on to rescue Edgar, he would confront Edgar about McCullum's findings, and the other doctor would confess to performing a transfusion with Elizabeth's blood, having accidentally started the epidemic. And as a result, Jonathan would let Edgar pass away from his injuries, not willing to save him. He would then inform Elizabeth of what Edgar had done, and unable to face her part in the epidemic, even if unwillingly, she would flee. Now, mixing the blood of a powerful vampire and King Arthur, Jonathan would move to eliminate the epidemic once and for all, meeting his maker, who would explain to Jonathan that he had been chosen to defeat an ancient vampire, the Red Queen, who had actually created his own maker, and he would confront her doing exactly that, and would put her to rest yet again. Now, with all threats in London taken care of, Jonathan would track down Elizabeth, discovering that she had planned to kill herself to atone for being the cause of the epidemic. However, Jonathan would convince her that with enough time that he'd be able to find a cure, and together they would stay locked in her manor until he could free them of their curse. Hello and welcome everyone to the first specifically requested fight of Season 3 of my Versus series, where Daniel Villegas has asked me to do a fight I'm actually very excited about, with the Royal Protector Corvo Attano from Dishonored and the Vampiric Doctor Jonathan Reid from Vampyr. Now, for this match I will be using Corvo mainly from the first game, but I will be using examples from Dishonored too, even though Emily is canonically the protagonist. And as usual, I will only be using the games for my primary research, meaning I have not taken into account any of the Dishonored books or comics into this video. Now, with that out of the way, let's start by comparing these two physically. During the events of Dishonored 1, Corvo was a 39-year-old human male in his prime, standing at 6 feet 4 inches tall and weighing around 200 pounds, with a muscular build. As the Royal Protector, Corvo would have needed to keep himself in excellent condition in order to protect his lover and daughter. Corvo is incredibly strong, being able to knock soldiers out in moments, can throw a man with a single hand, can break bone as well as cut apart full-grown men as well as armored guards, and can easily destroy wooden barriers, and finally, in Dishonored 2, could rip clockwork soldiers apart with his hand and sword. While not too impressive in speed, Corvo is still incredibly agile, being enhanced by the Outsider as well as having the ability to face multiple trained swordsmen at once, as well as blocking and deflecting bullets. Finally, Corvo's durability was also enhanced, letting him take hits from swords, survive getting shot, explosions, large falls, and even hits from magic in hand witch named Delilah, as well as the assassin Dowd, who was similarly marked by the Outsider. Unfortunately for this fight, there is very little in terms of feats to give Jonathan, as we simply aren't giving many examples of what vampires in his universe are capable of, in a physical sense. So Jonathan's sections will be a bit lacking in terms of direct examples. When he was turned into a vampire, Jonathan was a 32-year-old man in his prime, staying at around 6 feet and weighing around 200 pounds, with a muscular build. As a former World War I soldier, Jonathan would have kept himself in good condition around the events of the game, and as a vampire, his abilities were enhanced, but just how much is vague at best. Jonathan was strong enough to kill a large beast-like vampire, as well as defeated the Red Queen's avatar. Now, these larger vampires are capable of destroying a group of Skull vampires, which are naturally stronger than humans, putting Jonathan a couple of notches above humans in the food chain. Jonathan can also move so fast he appears to be teleporting, even being capable of dodging bullets. Durability is also pretty messy. He can survive multiple bullets as well as hits from powerful vampires, but these vampires can still be taken out by conventional means. They just require some wearing down first. However, lethal damage such as a bullet to the heart is insufficient on its own, but when Mary was stabbed with a part of a wooden cross, she was brought to rest, suggesting that certain weapons are more effective. Okay, so this one's a bit harder due to Jonathan being pretty vague with his limits, but I still think that there's enough to go on to say that one is a bit better than the other. Now, both Corvo and Jonathan are at their prime in their 30s, and due to the work they take as Royal Protector and Soldier respectively, both are in good condition physically, even before they were enhanced, so there's no real edge there. Both Corvo and Jonathan are strong enough to rip people apart, and while Corvo has been shown to break apart barriers and metal, Jonathan can compete with vampires that can rip apart other vampires, which already have the capacity to do the same to humans. So I'm really not too comfortable in saying that one is stronger than the other in terms of strength, as we just don't have that much to go on. Both fighters are fast enough to react to bullets, but Jonathan being able to move his entire body out of the way after one's been fired, while Corvo can only block or deflect them, on top of how Jonathan moves so fast that people think he's teleporting, gives me good reason to think that Jonathan is at least a bit faster. Finally, durability was the easiest to judge. While both fighters can take more damage than the average person, Corvo can still be easily killed by fatal blows, such as a stab to the heart or having his throat slit. As Dowd, someone with the same enhancements, can be killed like this. Meanwhile, Jonathan, while still killable, can't be instantly taken down, though decapitation would likely still put him down, and a shot to the head would stun him at least. Overall, while Corvo's enhancements put him on a similar level to Jonathan, and can even match his strength, Jonathan edges us out in speed and has a clear, though not overwhelming, durability advantage, giving the physical edge to Jonathan Reid. After becoming a vigilante, Corvo would gain a large amount of gear to help him overthrow the Lord Regent, mostly made as well as upgraded and maintained by the Loyalists. His main weapon was a collapsible sword, a single-edged 2-foot blade with a claw-like crossguard. His pistol was a modified flintlock, which could fire multiple rounds before needing to reload, and was modified for superior accuracy as well as able to utilize explosive rounds. And while flintlocks are normally very inaccurate, I'll say that due to the enhancements given by Piero, they can reliably be used to its max range of around 150 feet. He also used a crossbow for stealth or specialized projectiles as well as sleep darts and incendiary bolts. Aside from firearms, Corvo also had shrapnel grenades as well as spring razor traps, which would shoot out blades to cut apart anyone nearby. And finally, for protective gear, Corvo has his match, which partially protects his face, covering most of it in metal plating. For this fight, as Jonathan has a wide variety of weapons to choose from, I'll be granting Jonathan the loadout I used in my personal playthrough of the game, as you can only have 3 weapons equipped at one time. As a newly formed vampire, Jonathan kept a small yet effective set of weapons to defend himself from other vampires as well as hunters. His primary weapon was a single-edged, saber-style sword around 3 feet in length, the curved blade increasing the weapon's effectiveness as a slashing weapon, likely a weapon brought home by a World War I officer. His offhand weapon was a wooden stake made by vampire hunters. He primarily used this weapon to stun or break the guard of his opponents, and while made for use against vampires, he manages to use it effectively against humans as well. And finally, for a ranged weapon, Jonathan will be bringing a shortened pump-action shotgun. Now, while I'm not sure what type of shotgun this is, likely that it uses a 12-gauge shells, 2 of which can be loaded at any time, with an effective range of just over 100 feet. Both Corvo and Jonathan are bringing a relatively small yet effective set of tools to this fight, though even with some tools being similar, I feel that one clearly has the advantage. The swords both have pros and cons. While Corvo's is a better thrusting weapon and it's custom made, as well as enhanced for blade-on-blade combat, Jonathan's is longer and is better for slashing, so I feel that they even each other out. Corvo's pistol and Jonathan's shotgun would both be effective against each other. While true, a normal handgun wouldn't hurt Jonathan that much, the modified explosive bullets would definitely be more effective, and a point-blank shotgun blast would definitely injure Corvo heavily, if not outright kill him. The biggest difference here is with range, with Corvo having the advantage with about 50 more feet he can use his weapon at. Jonathan's stake would, in theory, work so long as he could get a hit on Corvo, but the issue here is that he would need to be extremely close to use it effectively, and Corvo's blade would be more than enough to counter this. And while Jonathan might be able to do something about it if he wielded the stake in tandem with the blade, the 2 weapons are used separately and for different purposes, so I don't feel it'll be very effective in this fight. Outside of this, Corvo has explosives, spring razor mines, a protective mass on top of having a better pistol. Really, all I can say is Jonathan's favor here is that his sword matches Corvo's. Everything else is either outclassed or just has more quantity. And so, I give Corvo Attano the edge in weapons and equipment. After his encounter with the Outsider, Corvo was given his mark, granting him several powers to aid him in his journey. Of the basic ones, he was given enhanced physicality, granting him better strength and agility on top of this. Blink is his first power, giving him the ability to teleport short to medium distances. Dark Vision shows Corvo the location of people, animals, traps, and things that would generally aid him, as well as helping avoid detection by seeing his sound waves and line of sight for enemies. Corvo has the ability to summon a large group of rats to swarm and eat the corpse of his opponents. He can also possess animals as well as people, but cannot attack while controlling them. He can create powerful wind blasts that can throw people into objects hard enough to kill them. And finally, for active abilities, Corvo has the power to completely stop time for 8 seconds. Which, while a small amount of time, is more than enough to take out multiple opponents or set up a scenario to do so. Corvo also has a set of passive abilities, such as some slight regeneration, increased agility, and everyone being killed by him turning to ash. Before we get into Jonathan's powers, I must clarify that his abilities branch depending on how he chooses to use them. So for each of these, I'll be going with the branch that I believe is more useful, or in other words, the branch I picked for my personal playthrough. As a vampire Ekon, Jonathan has the power to use blood magic as well as 2 other types, giving a wide variety of abilities to help him in combat, as well as hypnotizing people, drinking blood to gain strength, and many more uses. Using his super speed, Jonathan can ram into targets so fast they're actually injured from the impact, and can increase his damage by adding blood to his feet, making him move faster. He can disappear completely by surrounding himself in shadows, becoming invisible to the naked eye. Shadow Mist draws in surrounding shadows that will gather around his enemies before exploding out into spears to impale his opponents. Using blood magic, Jonathan can stun his opponents by coagulating their blood inside their body, while simultaneously ripping his opponent's blood out of their body and absorbing it. The Blood Spear is a set of 3 projectiles that Jonathan can throw to fight opponents from mid to long distance. He can use his blood as a shield, defending him from all forms of harm for 5 seconds or until it's broken. And once this blood barrier disappears, it will explode, dealing damage to anyone close to Jonathan. He can create claws with his blood to rip into his opponents without a weapon, cutting deep into them while taking blood and adding it to his own supply. Jonathan also has the power to use his blood to heal himself, instantly fixing a good amount of damage dealt. If he gives in to his darker nature, Jonathan will enter a rage, teleporting around and attacking everything nearby, dealing a high amount of damage through repeated attacks. Using his command of shadows, Jonathan can create a shadowy entity that will bind and hold a single opponent up into the air before killing them by impalement. Finally, Jonathan can cause the blood inside of someone to boil, eventually having the person explode. I think this category mostly speaks for itself. Jonathan clearly has Corvo beat in every area. His magic is more versatile, hits harder, has better range, heals him faster, and unlike Corvo, gives him defensive options on top of offense. Now, that's not to say that Corvo is helpless with his own powers. The Wind Blast would inflict a good amount of damage considering it kills normal man. Dark Vision completely counters the invisibility, rendering it useless, and Blink would let him evade many of Jonathan's attacks. But Corvo needs to wait for his mana to recharge before he can use his abilities back to back. Meanwhile, some of Jonathan's powers recharge simply by hitting Corvo. Finally, both of these fighters have moves that would either end the other instantly with a time stop, or Shadow Entity and Blood Boiling. But to that end, Jonathan has more options, and unlike Corvo, his are guaranteed to end the fight. Okay, now hear me out. Sure, Corvo's time stop is useful, but in order for it to be a trump card against Jonathan, he would need to know how to put him down for good, something Corvo likely wouldn't figure out until doing a good bit of damage. If Corvo uses it in the early fight, he'll likely go for a throat slit, or a stab to the heart, and expect that to drop Jonathan, only to discover that he had wasted his mana and would need to recover it. Now, don't get me wrong, if Corvo knows how to stop Jonathan, time stop would be more than enough to do so. But by the time he figures out how to do that damage, Jonathan would have plenty of opportunities to use his own instant kill powers. And so, I give Jonathan the edge in special abilities. Like in all of my matchups, I will be using Star Wars lightsaber fighting forms to better and more easily describe how both of these opponents approach combat with their particular styles. Now with that out of the way, let's begin. From a young age, Corvo was naturally gifted with a blade, either having learned enough or simply being naturally gifted enough to win the Blade Verbena, landing him a spot in the guard, and later his skill getting him gifted as a royal guard. Later, Corvo would go on to prove his skill yet again, being capable of defeating several guards at once, outdueling a master assassin endowed, as well as several high-ranking officers. Corvo's fighting style is that of a fencer, using quick and precise moments to slip through an opponent's guard utilizing feints and parries. And since fencing is the real-life inspiration for Form 2, you'd better not be surprised that I'm going to say that Corvo would be a master of Makashi. The weaknesses of this form include difficulty in delivering dedicated power blows, as well as not being great against multiple opponents or for projectile defense. However, Corvo has actually managed to successfully implement all 3 tactics into his fighting style, as well as keeping his versatility with his gear and powers. Tactically, Corvo would try to take shots at his opponents to try and get through their guard, often using his powers or tools if he was having trouble or is outnumbered. Jonathan Reid has been trained and was fighting ever since he joined or was drafted into World War I. And while Jonathan seems to know how to handle a blade well enough, I don't believe he was actually trained to do so, as according to what I could find, while swords were used by officers in cases of close combat, as a medic, Jonathan's training would have likely been kept to the use of firearms, and he was likely mimicking the style used rather than being trained in it. Now, if I had to describe his fighting style, I would compare it to a novice use of Form 2 Makashi, a form similar to real-life fencing, great for the use against other sword-wielding opponents. His skill level, from what we see, as I said before, is novice, as he isn't shown to do much more than attack, evade, and attack, with him utilizing his powers to mix up his assault and get damage in that he couldn't normally deliver. While both Corvo and Jonathan both successfully use their blade skills to cut down their enemies and overcome highly skilled opponents, I think it's clear to say that one is a bit more skilled than the other. While both men are naturally skilled with the blade, there is a difference between being a natural and having honed your skill with more than 2 decades of training and experience, which is clearly shown even in the gameplay. While Jonathan has the basics of precise movement and stamina management, he lacks the skill needed for more advanced techniques, such as parrying or working through an opponent's guard. Compare this to Corvo, who is not only capable of all of these, but even manages to utilize moves his combat style isn't generally geared for, such as power blows and taking on several fighters at once, and even managed to teach Emily these same skills well enough that she's arguably just as skilled as her father. While Jonathan has shown that he's competent with the blade and can hold his own against more skilled opponents, such as McCullum and the Red Queen's avatar, the issue is that he's always had to make up for his combative weaknesses with his powers, and while true Corvo uses his powers in combat as well, the difference here is that he used his skills in tandem with his powers to be a more effective fighter, while Jonathan used his powers as a crutch to deal the damage he knew he couldn't with his skill alone. And just for these reasons, I give Corvo the edge in combat skills and tactics. Let's set up this fight. Let's say that it takes place at Crime Alley in the streets of Gotham City. Jonathan stumbled down the alley. His legs were growing weaker as the need to feed grew stronger and stronger. Then he saw something he knew he should avoid, as a group of men in clown makeup surrounded an older, disheveled looking man. However, he hadn't fed in months, and really, would anyone miss trash like them? Having made up his mind and moving with supernatural speed, he crashes into the largest of them, knocking his friends down as he lifts the clown up and bites right down onto the jugular. Jonathan is lost as his hunger starts to quell, and before he knows it, he's drained the man of all blood. He then drops the man and looks down, feeling conflicted. He needed better control over himself. If this had happened around innocence, perhaps it was time to go back into isolation for a while. Then, hearing something hit the ground behind him, he sees a masked man with his sword drawn, staring directly at him. Corvo's eyes darted between the corpse and the man. After what he had just seen, he was expecting some monster, not a tired, respectable-looking man. The only indication of his true nature was the blood dripping from his chin onto the pavement below. "I don't suppose you'd believe me if I said this wasn't what it looks like," Jonathan asked with a sigh before drawing his own blade. In an instant, both men cleared the distance and locked blades. Both are a bit taken aback by the speed of the other, not having expected to be matched in their respective powers. Corvo quickly gets over it and twists his sword, catching Jonathan's in a crossguard, giving Corvo the opportunity to punch the vampire right in the nose, breaking it. Jonathan steps back, holding his face before he feels the blade of his opponent run through his chest, and growling in pain, he summons the blood in his hand and blasts Corvo point blank with all 3 spears, sending him flying back. The older man staggers, but is still able to deflect the blade Jonathan sends his way and even twists his sword, slashing open Jonathan's side, before making space once again. The doctor checks his side. Thanks to his condition, it felt more like a light slash than the near-fatal wound it would have been normally. Still, having blood gush from his side wouldn't do, and using a magic, he closed it. Corvo, seeing his opponent heal, isn't pleased, and decides that he'd have to end this and go for an attack Jonathan couldn't recover from. Grabbing his pistol, Corvo takes aim and fires at Jonathan, who moves out of the way, grabbing his shotgun and returning fire. Corvo moves to the side, but takes a few pellets to the shoulder anyway. Undeterred by the pain, Corvo takes another shot, hitting Jonathan in the chest, blowing off a good chunk of flesh before teleporting closer and stabbing into the stunned vampire's throat. He tries to twist his sword and decapitate the bloodsucker, but Jonathan already has Corvo's arm in his grasp, and holding his attacker still, he creates his claw before slashing into his abdomen, taking in his opponent's blood and healing again before lifting Corvo into the air and growling, "I didn't want this. I didn't want any of this, but you just couldn't hear me out." Corvo struggles to breathe as Jonathan pulls the blade from his neck and throws it to the ground before snarling and preparing to bite Corvo when suddenly there's a grenade in his face. Corvo watches the shock spread across his opponent's face before, at the last second, activating time stop. Knowing he only has a few seconds, Corvo breaks Jonathan's fingers to free himself before grabbing the sword and blinking up to the rooftop, and watching as time resumes and the grenade goes off. Jonathan is thrown to the ground as a good portion of his face is blown away, once again pooling his blood together to heal what he can before looking around to find Corvo, but seeing nothing. Not wanting to be left exposed, Jonathan cloaks his body in shadows, and Corvo, still watching from the rooftop, activates his dark vision and sees Jonathan make his way out to the alley in front of a theater where he stands out in the open, ready for Corvo to jump out at him. Rather than rush in, however, Corvo pulls out his dart gun and switches to the flame bolt before shooting Jonathan in the back and setting the vampire on fire. As he screams in agony trying to put out the flames, Corvo drops down and drives his blade into Jonathan's back from above. But like last time, it's ineffective and Corvo is thrown off, and now not having the mana to teleport is caught by his blood coagulating in his arms and legs and is left helpless, and right in front of him the shadows themselves shoot out, stabbing him in the leg inside. Jonathan, not knowing that Corvo still has to wait for his mana to recharge, doesn't let up and rushes into Corvo at high speeds, elbowing the man in the chest, fracturing his sternum. Corvo tries to slash at the vampire, but Jonathan is able to keep up with the Royal Protector now that he's injured, parrying a strike and cutting Corvo across the leg. Corvo follows this up with a power strike, but once again due to his injuries, Jonathan avoids it and slashes the man across the chest. Corvo jumps back and pulls out his pistol, but this time Jonathan is ready and sets up his shield, which tanks the blast. Jonathan is at a bit of a loss. This man had challenged him at a level he wasn't expecting, but now it was time to pull out the big guns. Corvo was taken off guard as the shadows themselves once again attack, constricting his arms and legs and holding them into the air as a spike prepared to impale him. However, Corvo sees a way out in a single rat by a sewer grate. Quickly possessing the rodent, Corvo watches as Jonathan twists and turns in shock, not knowing where Corvo had gone, and quickly moves behind him, exiting the rat and using his magic to form a swarm of rats at Jonathan's feet. The vampire slashes at the rodents that begin to devour the flesh on his legs, only to see another grenade roll in between them. Jonathan dashes away, but as he does, Corvo once again activates Time Stop and fires several bullets in his path before resuming time. And suddenly, 3 explosive rounds slam into Jonathan, and this time, and with that, the vampire's strength leaves him on his knees as Corvo walks up with his blade ready to take Jonathan's head off. However, the vampire then surprises Corvo when he asks the Royal Protector to spare him, explaining the vampire virus and his attempts to cure it, giving Corvo a moment of hesitation, ultimately deciding to spare the doctor. And after giving the doctor a warning that if he found him feeding again, he would end it once and for all, teleports away, leaving Jonathan to heal and retreat. And with that, I declare Corvo Attano, the Royal Protector, the winner. Alright, while I didn't know how this would turn out, you all seem to have this figured out pretty much from the beginning. Now, physicality was pretty simple. Both are enhanced due to the Outsider's Mark and Vampirism respectively, but Jonathan has shown better speed and durability. Strength wasn't really clear as neither character has any standout showings of strength that would place one over the other, and stamina was a non-factor, so Jonathan is clearly better here. Weapons were much the same but in Corvo's favor. Their swords are about the same, both having pros and cons, and their guns would both be effective against each other. The thing that really gives this to Corvo is that he simply has more gear on him. And while what Jonathan does have is enough to hold his own, Corvo's gear gives him more avenues to approach combat and more options to change up the fight. Now, their magic was much less even. While Corvo's skill set does give him options to evade and heavily hurt Jonathan, even having the ability to evade one of Jonathan's insta-kill attacks, his magic takes much more time to recharge, is less versatile, and doesn't hit nearly as hard. The only thing I can really say for the Royal Protector is that his powers are enough to keep up with the vampire if he's smart with them, which thankfully he is. Combat skills was really what decided this match for me, as Jonathan's inexperience with the blade made this an easy decision when compared to Corvo's decades of experience and nearly unmatched skill with his sword. But what really won the category, and even the match, as before this it could go either way, was their tactics. While Jonathan is smart in how he fights and is able to pick up on and respond to patterns, thanks to Corvo's wide range of abilities, he's far from predictable. And unlike Jonathan, who uses his powers as a crutch in combat, Corvo uses his powers to enhance his skill and make him a deadlier combatant. Now, I do think that given enough time and training, Jonathan could certainly make up for this, and if he improved his skills with the blade and how to better use his powers, he would certainly take down Corvo, but by the end of Vampyr, this isn't the case. Overall, this fight was actually much closer than I had expected, even not really knowing how this would go down going into it. And under the right circumstances, Jonathan could win. In fact, if you use a Jonathan who had drained every available civilian in London, I believe he would be capable of overpowering Corvo. However, when it comes down to games with moral choices like these, the good playthroughs are typically canon, so I erred on the side of caution. But that's just my opinion. What do you think? Do you agree that the Royal Protector would outduel his Demon of the Night, or do you think that the good doctor's powers would be enough to bring down the masked assassin? Let me know in the comments down below. If I got anything wrong, please feel free to correct me. Right, please rate, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, as I have plenty more like it. I also have a Twitter and Discord where you can talk to me directly, as well as links to the channels Winter Ghost and 3 Tacos Gamer, all in the description. Right, with all that, I'm Reid932, and I'll see you next time.
You know, she made a promise to me once, that she'd always be at my side. And look how well she's kept it.
Did she make that promise to you? Or to the person you were pretending to be?
So I just wasn't good enough for you.
You know it's so much more than that.
I know you've made your choice. And I've made mine.
Wutai troops have hijacked Shinra Express, Mark 93-2. The train is currently headed to Midgar Sector 8. A soldier operative will be inserted to neutralize the situation. We are to proceed as scheduled. Commence mission in 3, 2, 1. Mark. Begin mission. Operative is ready for insertion.
The train has been overrun by Wutai troops. Eliminate them and regain control of the train.
Oh yeah!